My sister demanded custody of my niece after 15 years in prison, claiming I stole her daughter's life, but my niece chose me in court. It was a Tuesday when the letter came, a crisp white envelope amidst the usual bills and junk mail. It was official looking, with a court seal stamped in the corner, and my stomach did a weird flip. I recognized the return address, the state correctional facility my sister London had been residing in for the past 15 years. 15 years. It felt like a lifetime, a blink of an eye, and an eternity all at once. 15 years since I'd gotten that panic call from our mom, telling me about London's arrest, the frantic cries, and how I needed to come home and take care of my niece, Presley. Presley was just a baby then, barely a year old, all wide eyes and soft, pudgy cheeks. I was barely an adult myself, fresh out of college with big dreams and a new apartment in the city. My life changed that day, and now, after all these years, London was back. The letter demanded my presence at a hearing, a custody battle for Presley, who was now 16, smart, sarcastic, and a little bit too independent for her own good. Stole her daughter's childhood, the letter had accused in clipped legal prose. It felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't stolen anything. I had raised Presley. I'd gone to every parent-teacher conference, band recital, and soccer game. I'd helped her with homework, navigated her first heartbreak, and taught her how to drive. I was her parent. Now London was back, wanting to reclaim what she'd willingly given up. I reread the letter again, anger mixing with a strange kind of fear. I'd always known this day might come, but I'd hoped, secretly, that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't want to disrupt Presley's life. I didn't tell Presley about the letter right away. I wanted to figure out how to tell her, how to explain that the woman she knew as her aunt was now claiming to be her mother and demanding to be recognized as such. I spent that evening pacing, running through scenarios in my head, each one ending in some kind of messy, emotional explosion. I looked at Presley, at the way her head was bent over her textbooks, the messy bun of hair at the nape of her neck, the familiar way she bit her lip when concentrating. All the years of late-night talks, movie marathons, and inside jokes flashed through my mind. The bond we shared was strong, built on trust, love, and mutual respect. How could London just come back and demand to disrupt that? It was late, almost midnight, when I finally decided I had to tell her. I tapped lightly on her door, and when she called out a sleepy, "Come in," I sat on the edge of her bed. "Presley," I began, trying to sound casual, "remember how I've told you about your mom, about London?" She nodded, her eyes now wide awake and fixed on mine. "Well," I hesitated, "I got a letter today from London." Presley went still, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. She's coming back," I continued, watching her carefully. I laid out the facts, not hiding anything, telling her about the custody battle, the claims that I stole her childhood, and the upcoming court hearing. She listened silently, her face a mask of barely contained emotions. When I was done, she just stared at me, her eyes searching mine. "So she's not my aunt, she's my mom?" she asked softly, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. I nodded. I didn't have to say more, the look in her eyes had all of the answers. Update 1. The court hearing was a week away, and everything felt like it was spinning out of my control. Presley was quiet, withdrawn. She'd started spending most of her time in her room, avoiding conversations about London. I was getting increasingly worried. Her whole life was about to change, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I tried talking to her, gently broaching the subject of London's impending presence, of what her mom was like before she went away. Presley would just shrug and say, "It doesn't matter. It's not like she's been around for most of my life." Her words felt like a sharp stab, a reminder of the years London had missed. I was also running myself ragged trying to gather evidence for the court. I met with a lawyer who explained that it was going to be an uphill battle. I didn't have a legal document stating I was her legal guardian, and London, despite her past, had every right to try and get custody back. "You did a wonderful thing raising her," the lawyer said to me over the phone, "but sometimes the best thing isn't what's needed legally, and that could be difficult to counter." I felt a surge of anger. It wasn't about legalities or documents, it was about what was best for Presley. I had her records from school, doctors, even pictures from every single birthday. I had years and years of proof that I was her parent, and no letter from prison was going to change that. The stress was eating at me. I found myself snapping at coworkers, forgetting appointments, and losing sleep. I was so scared that I was going to lose Presley, but I was also scared that if London did get her, she'd get hurt or traumatized like she was the night that I took her. The thought of London having control of Presley terrified me to the point that I didn't sleep. That week leading up to the hearing felt like a slow-motion train crash, and I knew it was just going to get worse. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I went to Presley's room and sat at her door. She was awake as well and asked me if we could talk. "I don't understand why she's doing this," Presley mumbled. "I'm so used to you and I'm scared. What if she wants to uproot me?" I told her that London can't do that, that I'm her guardian and her home, that we have a strong bond, something that isn't easily broken. But deep down, I wasn't as confident as I wanted to sound. She then asked what she was like back then, if she had known me as a baby. "Your mom, London, she loved you so much, Presley. She was so excited for you and was a great mom, a good person. But people make mistakes, and you can forgive, but you can't forget. But she wanted what was best for you, so she asked for me to raise you as I see fit, and you would always be safe." Presley was silent for a moment, thinking. "I wish it could be just me and you. It'll always be us," I said, reaching out to hold her hand and try my best to convince both of us. But even saying those words, it felt hollow. Update 2. The courtroom was a sterile, emotionless box, filled with the hushed whispers of lawyers, the shuffling of papers, and the nervous energy of everyone involved. I sat beside my lawyer, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, stealing glances at Presley, who sat beside me, her face an unreadable mask. When London finally walked in, it felt like time had suddenly lurched forward. I hadn't seen her since that day at the police station, those years ago. She'd been gaunt then, lost. Now she looked healthier, stronger. She had this hard look in her eyes, a coldness that I didn't recognize, and I instantly felt a chill go through me. There was no familiar spark of recognition when she looked at me. She focused all her attention on Presley, and instantly, I hated it. We had our moments in court. My lawyer presented all of the documents, and I told my story and Presley's story from my perspective, talking about my commitment to her safety, well-being, and happiness, all while keeping my composure. When London took the stand, it felt like everything was turned upside down. She spoke with a practiced confidence, detailing the struggles she'd been through, the reforms she'd made, the remorse she felt for abandoning her daughter. But there was no remorse. She just sounded angry, and her eyes were focused on me like I was the bad guy. She talked about her mistakes, about wanting a second chance, about Presley deserving to know her real mom. And that's when she said it. "He took her childhood from me, he stole her." The words echoing in the silence of the courtroom, my heart clenched at her audacity. My lawyer had advised me to keep quiet, not to argue, and not to get emotional. It was the hardest thing to do, but I did it. But then Presley spoke, out of turn, defiantly. Her voice was trembling but clear. "No, you did," she said, her eyes meeting London's. "You chose to leave. You made your choices, and now you want to come back and change it all. I have a family now, and it's not going to be with you." London looked shocked, like someone had just punched her in the face. "You're my daughter," she stammered, reaching out as if to try and touch her. Presley pulled away. "You don't get to call me that. You abandoned me. You don't know me, and I don't know you." It was the most she'd said to London or about the situation, and it was probably the first real glimpse that my niece had that her mother wasn't who she thought she was. The judge called a recess, and I pulled Presley out of the room, my heart racing, a mix of pride and fear churning inside me. I'd tried so hard to protect her, but it seemed she was always going to be stronger than I was. The judge returned, and the courtroom was silent. She addressed us all, taking her time and choosing her words very carefully. She acknowledged London's journey, her difficult path, and the changes she'd made, and then addressed the evidence provided. All of it. My commitment to Presley and the home I provided her. But ultimately she addressed what Presley said in the courtroom, and she asked Presley if that is truly how she felt. She was honest and nodded. The judge then ruled in my favor. London was devastated, and even I felt a twinge of pity for her. The judge said that it's in Presley's best interest to remain in my care, and that London would be allowed visitation if she and I agreed to work together. Presley didn't say much when it was over. She just reached out and grabbed my hand, and for that moment I felt like everything was okay. London approached me outside the courtroom. She was no longer angry, but she was confused. "Why didn't she choose me?" she asked softly. "I know I did a terrible thing, but I was hoping that she would still want me as a mother. Presley is a great person. Because of who you were before, she sees you now. She sees how you abandoned her for 15 years, but she also sees that you are a good person now. She wants the best for you too. She told me that she wants you to have a good life. You've changed her life for the better. You've done a great job raising her. I won't deny that. You have become a wonderful father figure for her," she admitted with a small, sad smile. I nodded. I will never forgive you for what you've said, for hurting Presley and the people who did everything for her. But, I hesitated, I want you to be a part of her life, to have a connection. You're her mom after all. I won't keep you apart. She nodded, a few tears coming to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd hoped for, but it was the closest we were ever going to get. The road ahead would be hard, filled with uncertainties and delicate conversations, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I had raised Presley for 15 years. I had poured every part of myself into making sure that she had the best life possible. Now London was going to be a part of it, and all I could do was accept it. We were going to be a family, no matter how different or unconventional that might be, and all three of us were going to have to navigate through it the best that we could.
My mother made a TikTok pretending to be me, dressed as a clown, and my boss thinks I'm some sort of marketing genius now. My life has been a bizarre circus lately, and it's all thanks to my mother. I love her, I really do, but well, she's a lot. She's always been one for dramatic flair, but now it's reached a whole new level of, frankly, embarrassing. It started about 6 months ago, when she decided she was going to become a TikTok star. Okay, fine, whatever. I'm Aria, 25, and I work as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company. I'm not exactly in the social media demographic, my job being rather serious, and my off time is spent playing video games or reading. My mom, on the other hand, bless her heart, saw some teenagers doing dances online and thought it was her calling. She tried to get me in on it, of course, which I flatly refused. I'm just not that kind of person. But here's the kicker, she didn't just start a TikTok account for herself. No, she made one pretending to be me. She found some old pictures of me from my early 20s, when I actually did wear makeup and occasionally go out to places that didn't serve pizza, and she used them as the profile. The username: Aria the Adventurer. The videos started off harmless enough, lip-syncing to pop songs and doing those silly little dances with the filters. I found out about it from my younger sister Kinsley, who thought it was the funniest thing ever and screenshotted it. I was mortified, but also, weirdly, not entirely surprised. My mom has always been a little extra. I had her delete it instantly and honestly thought that was the end of it. I talked to her about it being my personal space online, and she apologized and seemed genuinely upset. I went to bed hoping this would be a lesson for her. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I start noticing weird looks at work. Little things, like my boss, Mr. Henderson, who I mostly talk with about budgets and deadlines, would pause mid-conversation and just stare at me for a second. And then Kinsley, bless her heart, sent me a link to a TikTok that had 100K views. It was my mom, dressed up in a clown outfit. Full face paint, bright red wig, giant floppy shoes and all. She was doing some interpretive dance to a ridiculous song, and the caption was, "When the spreadsheets get too much." The username was still Aria the Adventurer. My stomach dropped and felt like I was falling in slow motion. This was not good. I tried to laugh it off, but I was spiraling. How much of this was my mother, making fun of my life? Why was she using my online name still after I specifically asked her to delete it? Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He didn't say anything about the video, but instead asked me if I was feeling overwhelmed at work, if my responsibilities were too much for me. I told him I felt good and that I was on top of everything, but he just kind of smiled, like he knew I was lying. I was just confused at this point. I was still reeling from the video. He told me he admired my spirit and encouraged me to take a mental health day soon. That just made me even more anxious, and I immediately went to my desk and made a point of emailing him updates to all my projects that I was still working on. He then sent me a chat message saying that he could see how much work I put in, and said I deserved to be happy and do things that made me happy. I started to get that my work persona was not matching with the online version, all the while knowing it wasn't even me. That night I confronted my mom. I wasn't angry, just bewildered. She looked completely baffled and said, "But honey, everyone loves the clown, it's you being silly. Showing your creative side." I tried to explain the difference between my personal life, my professional life, and my internet persona being completely separate. I showed her some of the messages I had received, and she started crying, telling me she was just trying to be supportive and show my personality. Kinsley just recorded it and started laughing. I didn't even have the energy to yell at her for that. I told them both to get out. It was a long night. Update 1. The damage control continues. I spent a significant portion of the next day trying to find every instance of Aria the Adventurer online. Turns out, my mom wasn't just on TikTok. She was on Instagram, YouTube, even had a bizarre blog where she was writing in character. She'd even made an Etsy shop selling tiny clown hats, some of which, I kid you not, had the company logo she got from looking over my shoulder. The fact that she had this kind of free time astounded me. This whole thing was like some bizarre fever dream. I somehow managed to delete most of the accounts or get them made private. But a few of the videos had gone pretty viral, with hundreds of thousands of views. It was like trying to hold back the tide. I spent lunch on the phone with my sister, who was less than helpful and seemed to think the whole thing was hilarious. I got a text from Kinsley that she shared the video of our mom crying to her friends. I decided the only way to really fix this was to talk to Mr. Henderson. I figured it was better to get in front of this before it became a bigger HR issue. He actually looked relieved when I asked for a minute of his time. I just blurted it all out. I told him everything about the TikToks, about my mom's obsession with social media, about the clown outfit, the whole shebang. I was ready for him to laugh me out of his office, to think I was some sort of insane person who lived a secret life online as a clown. Instead, he just sat there, listening intently, nodding along. When I was done, he actually apologized. He told me he'd seen the videos and figured it was some sort of elaborate marketing thing I was doing. Said he admired my outside-the-box thinking, and that he wished that I had told him sooner. He said the team were having a good time making memes about the videos, and that I am the perfect person for project management because I know how to make things work. He didn't even ask me about the company logo, which was a small miracle. He ended by saying that he had a son about my age and that, well, some parents can be a bit much. Mr. Henderson is a dad who gets it, which is not what I was expecting, but I'm honestly relieved. He agreed to keep it confidential and said that I would still have a job. This was better than I could have ever imagined. I'm not sure what to do with my mom. On one hand, this whole situation has been an absolute nightmare, but I also know she's just trying to connect with me in a way she understands. Kinsley is still laughing about it, but she's being surprisingly helpful in taking some of the heat off me. She actually sat my mom down for a conversation about internet safety and said she was being irresponsible and that she had to be smarter online. I still don't know what all she said, but my mother has not mentioned anything since then. I think she is finally realizing that the internet isn't just one big party. But I also haven't seen her delete the accounts, and I'm not sure if she will. It's hard to be mad, though. Mostly I just feel exhausted. Maybe what I need is a mental health day, after all. But I still feel as though I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Update 2. It's been about a month since I last updated and, honestly, things have been calm. Too calm, perhaps. My mom has finally stopped with the clown videos. She hasn't mentioned my online persona. And life at work is relatively normal. It's kind of unsettling, honestly. I was so used to the chaos that the sudden silence feels a bit strange. I feel as if something is always lurking underneath the surface. Kinsley has gone back to being her usual annoying self, so everything feels more balanced. Mr. Henderson has not brought up the whole thing, but he did introduce me to his son, who is also in tech, and we all went to lunch last week. His son, Axel, seemed really chill and was genuinely interested in my work. I have a feeling Mr. Henderson is playing matchmaker, but I'm not entirely opposed to it. It's nice to be seen as a normal person for a change. The other shoe did drop, though, in the form of my dad. My dad, who has always been the practical, down-to-earth one in the family, suddenly asked me about the videos, and I almost had a heart attack. I was so confused. I could tell he was trying to be serious, but his face looked like he was holding back laughter. Turns out he'd seen the whole thing and thought it was the funniest thing ever, especially the one where my mom trips over her giant clown shoes. I was starting to get annoyed with the rest of my family laughing about this, but I was relieved my dad wasn't mad. It seems that Kinsley showed him while on a video call last month, so it wasn't my mother but both my dad and sister this time. He was less interested in protecting my image and more amused by my mom's antics. He was even asking about it now. He was making jokes about my mom and her creative genius. I think my mom thought she was going to get in trouble with him, and it seems that he got a kick out of the whole thing. I could even see a tiny bit of pride in his eyes that his wife was doing her best to be creative. He also asked if I was going to start posting my own videos, which made me shudder a little bit. He kept winking at me and told me to let loose a little. I ended the conversation quickly. I think I've reached a point of acceptance with my mom's whole situation. It's still embarrassing, of course, and I'm definitely wary of her starting any new online trends, but I've started to see some of the humor in it all. Maybe, just maybe, I do have a creative side she was trying to bring out. It certainly made life a bit more interesting, if nothing else. I even considered watching the videos again, just to see if they are actually as bad as I remember. I don't think I will, but I've at least thought about it. I'm starting to think the real circus here isn't the internet, but my family, and I wouldn't trade them for the world, even if they are a bit of a mess. I just hope that the next time things get a little chaotic, I'm a bit more prepared, and maybe I'll even try wearing a tiny clown hat, just to see how it looks. Maybe. My parents secretly did a DNA test on my children, and it came back with unclear results. Now they are mad at me for cutting them off. My parents have always been intense. Like, the kind of intense where they micromanage every aspect of their lives and try to extend that control to everyone around them. I'm used to it, mostly, having grown up under their roof. I love them, I do, but I also understand the need for personal boundaries, a concept they seem allergic to. My husband, Elias, and I have been married for 8 years, and we have 2 beautiful children, Daniel, who's 7, and Sylvia, who's 5. We live about an hour away, and we see them pretty regularly, mostly on holidays and the occasional weekend visit. They're never shy about offering unsolicited parenting advice, but I usually just smile and nod, knowing it's not worth engaging. About 6 months ago, things took a bizarre turn. My mother, Sylvia, started making these odd comments about how my kids don't really look like the rest of our family, about how their coloring isn't quite the same, the usual old people stuff. Then she started hinting that maybe they got their looks from Elias's side, as if that was some kind of suspicious thing. It escalated quickly. She would casually bring up genetic traits, asking if I knew my husband's family history, that kind of invasive stuff. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just her usual nosy behavior, until I accidentally overheard a conversation she was having with my father, Albert. They were talking about getting DNA tests done to prove that my kids were really their grandkids. My heart dropped to my stomach. They were actually questioning my children's lineage behind my back. I confronted them, of course, and they tried to play it off as just being concerned, but their faces were a mix of guilt and frustration that they'd been discovered. They refused to admit they'd already done the test. I was furious, but part of me was also deeply hurt. How could my own parents doubt my integrity and my husband's? They've met Elias' family. They're all lovely people, and there are similarities. It felt like a complete betrayal of trust, not just for me but also for my kids. This is going to affect them when they finally get wind of it. I don't even know what to say. Update 1, I'm still reeling from the discovery. The more I think about it, the angrier I become. It's not just the fact that they secretly tested my children's DNA. It's also the blatant disrespect it shows for Elias. He's a kind, gentle, hard-working, supportive man, and seeing my family essentially questioning his character because of his genes hurts him too. They don't even know him. They've seen him at gatherings, have lunch with him when we visit, and it's all a farce. I've spoken to Elias about it, and he's equally hurt and disgusted. At first, he tried to downplay it, saying that my parents have always been different, but I could see the anger in his eyes. This is our kids, our marriage. This is supposed to be about love, not whether they're purebred or not. I decided to take a break from my parents. I told them that I would not visit or speak to them until they took accountability for their actions. Of course, they tried to argue and manipulate me, but I hung up. For the past few weeks, the silence from them has been deafening. I know they're probably seething that I dared to defy them, but honestly, I don't care anymore. The most upsetting part about this whole thing is how it's going to impact my kids. They are so innocent and pure. I don't want them to grow up thinking their grandparents have issues with them because of their looks or heritage. I haven't told them anything yet. I want them to remember the happy times when their grandparents were actually trying to be good people. So far, the few weeks have been a peaceful change in pace. Elias has been amazing, showering me and the kids with extra love and support. My husband has always been amazing, to be fair, but he's been so loving to me and the kids. We are focusing on strengthening our family unit right now, and honestly, I think we are stronger than ever. We have some friends asking how we're doing and if I've spoken to my family, but I simply tell them we're good and keep it vague. My siblings also haven't reached out, which is weird and upsetting. Update 2. A few weeks turned into a couple months, and the silence from my parents was starting to eat away at me. Part of me wondered if they'd finally realized the gravity of their actions, but a bigger part of me knew it was probably just a strategy to get me to crack. My sister, Delaney, finally reached out, and I thought maybe she was going to be the voice of reason, but boy, was I wrong. Turns out my parents hadn't been quiet. They had been strategizing. Delaney was calling me to set the record straight and said I've been overreacting. She was convinced that I was just being overly emotional and that my parents were just being concerned grandparents. She said that I should be understanding of the difficult and intense life that they live, that they do it out of love. Then she let something slip that made my blood boil. She revealed that the DNA test my parents had done came back with unclear results. What that is, I don't know, but what she didn't realize was that it just confirmed that they did the test to begin with. It was the last straw. I told Delaney that I was done. Done with the manipulation, done with their disrespect, and done with pretending that their behavior was normal. She tried to argue, saying that I was being dramatic and selfish, but I hung up. This made me confront the situation head-on. I knew that the longer I stayed silent, the more my parents would dig their heels in. The silence was hurting me more than them. I also realized that my kids had been asking why we hadn't been visiting them, and I had been deflecting. But it was time to tell them the truth in a way that they can understand. It wasn't easy. I wanted to shield them from all of this, but I couldn't let them be gaslit by my family. With Elias by my side, I explained to Daniel and Sylvia that their grandparents were a little confused and had some big feelings to process. I told them that we are a family, and that family is about loving and supporting each other. I told them their grandparents hadn't been doing that and were making things difficult. Both kids were understanding, more than I thought they would be. Daniel just asked if Grandpa was mad at him and if he could get him a cake. Then they asked if they would be able to visit their cousins soon. I told them that that would depend on their grandparents. Update 3. It has been about a year now. A year since I accidentally overheard that awful conversation. Life has been surprisingly peaceful. We've focused on ourselves, and I haven't had any contact with my family. My kids ask about them sometimes, but not as often as when this whole thing first started. It was like they realized that their grandparents were not as infallible as they thought. I did get a message from my father a few weeks ago. He did not apologize. Rather, he said that he is disappointed in me for abandoning the family. I didn't respond. I am so done. I think that's what hurts the most. They're never going to understand. They will never see that they were in the wrong. They will probably go to their deathbeds thinking I was a horrible daughter for standing up for my kids and my husband. I've come to terms with this, though, which has been liberating. I think about all of the things they will miss out on. All the little things I shared with my parents, growing up, that my kids won't get to do with them. But their toxicity has finally made me realize that I can't sacrifice my children's mental health for my parents' feelings. Elias and I have been discussing whether or not we should move. Our house has many memories and a whole lot of love, but the idea of moving somewhere where we can truly be free is very exciting. I also told my siblings, who were all trying to manipulate me and push me to see my family, to all F off. They are as toxic as my parents. I've also realized that when I was a kid, my parents would always say how they'll be here for me and that I can always count on them. I can't believe that I actually believed them. My kids are doing amazing. Daniel is really into basketball and coding, and Sylvia has started painting and doing arts and crafts, a complete contrast from Daniel. I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to protect them, even from family. I hope my kids know how much Elias and I love them. I'm sure in time, my parents will realize how deeply they hurt us, but until then, we will live happily and without them. I've never felt more at peace.